We will now be moving to hear from witnesses from the Right to Life Australia. We're also expecting witnesses from Cherish Life Queensland to join us, but I understand at the moment we just have Dr. Seaman from the Right to Life Australia, from Right to Life Australia joining us via video conference. Can I just confirm that you can hear us and see us okay?
Indeed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Hear and see me?
If you have an opening statement, this is your opportunity to do so, and then I'll be passing the call to senators to put questions to you. So if you do have one, please proceed.
Thank you. Yes. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to present my personal views on this bill. As only New South Wales and South Australia have abortion laws which ensure that babies born alive after abortion are afforded treatment equal to all other babies in Australia, I concur with Professor Howe that federal protection is needed to ensure equality in treatment for all live-born babies. Professor Howe has shown that live birth remains a recognised complication of abortion, as we have heard already, more so in late-term abortion without prior feticide, and that there are survivors of abortion who have reached adulthood. There is also evidence that live birth after mid-trimester abortion is common and that adult survivors of abortion have formed an international support group, Abortion Survivors Network, which includes Australians. Post-abortion neonates have variable survival potential depending on their degree of prematurity and abortion trauma. Medical care should therefore be tailored to their medical condition, ranging from palliation, which is comfort care, to life-sustaining care. Although detailed state and hospital-based guidelines exist for the management of preterm babies and those with life-limiting conditions, little is known about the standard of medical care received by post-abortion neonates. Some termination guidelines, for example, Queensland Health, emphasise do not provide life-sustaining treatment, even when it may be indicated in some cases. During my 39 years working in obstetrics and gynaecology, I've heard of numerous instances where medical and midwifery staff were unprepared for abortion ending in live birth and conflicted as to what they should be doing for such a baby. And there are anecdotes of staff emotionally traumatised when a baby is left to die from neglect, a form of passive infanticide, and we just heard an account. Each year there are at least 52 newborn persons, legal Australian citizens, born into a medico-legal no man's land, except in my state, New South Wales, which have laws to guide their care. 4 states and 2 territories have no legal guidance. The Human Rights Children Born Alive Protection Bill 2022 provides federal statutory protection for all babies born alive in Australia, a legal framework to ensure equality of care for babies born after termination, and protects aborting mothers from prosecution. I reject the argument that the bill would impose resuscitation measures which would interfere with neonatal palliative care. The same neonatal care should apply to all babies born alive. I welcome your questions and thank you again for the opportunity to present.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the call to Senator Antic. Senator Canavan is seeking the call first. Just before we proceed, Can I just check we don't have other witnesses? No? Yeah. Okay. We have apparently reached out to those witnesses who are yet to join us. So Senator Canavan, but I will let you know if those witnesses join.
No problems.
So please proceed, Senator
Thank you very much. Look, I just wanted to go to the opening statement first. You mentioned New South Wales and I think another state I just missed that do have South Australia. Thank you, South Australia, that have some obligations on to provide care to a baby born alive. Could you just take us through in a bit more detail what those provisions are in those states?
I'm familiar with the South Australian provision, and in particular Clause 3, which states that there is a duty of care for medical practitioners in attendance at an abortion of a live-born baby resulting in a live birth to provide the same care as would be provided to any other baby born alive. Now, what does that translate to practically speaking? Well, we know that most terminations of pregnancy occur on babies who are incapable of surviving outside the womb, and also that through the abortion process itself, they're not delivered in optimal care, in optimal conditions, so that even when they're born alive, they're in suboptimal condition. Therefore, mostly this will have implications of proper palliative care. And so this includes wrapping the child to provide warmth, providing human contact, and depending on gestation, the needs will be different. And I think it's important that where there is the possibility of a live birth of a baby, that is where feticide hasn't been performed at the start of the abortion, then these mothers should be delivered in tertiary institutions where there is access to a paediatrician, a neonatologist who can assess the child and determine what kind of palliative care is needed. Now, for instance, if the baby is distressed through physical injuries suffered, it may require pain relief palliation. If the baby is fitting, epilepsy, due to hypoxia, lack of oxygen, it may require anticonvulsant therapy as part of palliative care. And I've read some guidelines, and I've made reference to those in my opening statement, that if a baby is distressed through hunger, so this would be a more mature baby, that it's appropriate to feed the baby. So there is a whole range of palliative care measures which should be applied. And then, of course, you'll have those who are born alive and, in spite of being in poor condition through the abortion procedure, still have the capability of surviving and going on to adult existence. So those should be given life-sustaining treatment, without doubt.
Chair, do you mind if I just finish one more question?
Sure, and then I'd like to invite an opening statement.
I realise we do have Mr. Seaman, we have the other witnesses in the room, so we'll give them an opportunity. But just while I'm on this train of thought, to your knowledge then of the New South Wales provisions, I understand you're not overly familiar with South Australian issues. Does this bill before the committee in effect replicate what's in New South Wales? Does it provide anything extra or lesser, or is it about the same as what the New South Wales standards are?
It will achieve, I have read the New South Wales one briefly, but not in detail, and my understanding of both bills is that what they offer will be translated into a national standard. Okay, and I think this is really important because babies born alive post-abortion will mostly require palliative care, and so that's an important aspect of care for all babies born alive, irrespective of their circumstances. The additional protection here is that mothers won't be prosecuted for having undergone the abortion. I think that's very important. Yeah. Now, may I ask a question?
Not normally, but go for it. It can be rhetorical, I suppose. But
just very briefly, it seems to me that if we're dealing with survivors of abortion, that it's terribly important that the Senate actually hears something from survivors of abortion who've reached adulthood. Otherwise, I think the inquiry would be somewhat incomplete. Are there any such survivors that will be presenting?
We'll maybe talk to you offline, Mr. Seaman.
Yes, Mr. Seaman, the witness list is available publicly. I do just now want to welcome Mr. Cliff and Ms. Collier. Mr. Cliff is joining us from Cherish Life Queensland, and Ms. Collier is from the Right to Life Australia. Wanted to give you an opportunity to make an opening statement if you have one.
Great.
Mr. Cliff.
Yeah. Senators, thank you for your time this morning. The goal of this bill is very simple. This bill will ensure that an Australian child who has been born alive as a result of a failed abortion procedure will in the future be entitled to the same level of medical care and treatment as any other newborn child. As it stands, this is not the case. And until this bill gets passed, potentially this afternoon, tonight or tomorrow or some other time in the near future, a child will be born alive from a failed abortion procedure and they will be prevented from any life-saving treatment. Essentially, left to die. Senators, this is a horrendous reality of which your average tax-paying Australian is completely unaware of. Now, the likelihood of this happening is not as rare as those opposing this bill are likely to suggest. I want to now just present some clear empirical statistics, in other words, objective facts. In Queensland from 2010 to 2020, there was a total of 1,153 late-term abortions, of which 328 babies were born alive. In Victoria, from the same period, there was a total of 3,776 late-term abortions, of which 396 babies were born alive. That's a total of 724 babies in 10 years. And listen, if it was only one baby, this bill would be worth it. Alongside statistics, we also have other empirical evidence. Numerous survival testimonies, I'm sure, which you'll hear of today, of those who have survived an abortion procedure and went on to live a full life. However, closer to home, an Australian baby girl, again, by the name of Jessica Jane, was not so fortunate. 22-week-old Jessica survived the abortion procedure inside her mother's womb. However, tragically, she would then go on to die from the procedure outside of her womb. She lived, she breathed, she cried, but 80 minutes later, she died. And I'm not sure if you've read the coroner's report from Jessica Jane's case, but conclusions from his expert opinion are very powerful. And I want to quickly read some of them here. This is a selection of Coroner Greg Kavanagh's comments. In 80 minutes of Jessica's life, she had a separate and independent existence to her mother. The deceased was not and should not be described as a fetus or anything else that diminishes her status as a human being. The deceased, having been born alive, deserves all the dignity, respect and value that our society places on human life. In my view, this is the coroner, newly born unwanted and premature babies should have the same rights. Then listen to this. The fact that her death was inevitable should not affect her entitlement to such care and attention. And we know deep down, don't we, that the coroner's right. Regardless of the circumstances of birth, all Australian babies should be entitled to the best medical care and attention that Australia has to offer. Yet currently this isn't the case. In summary, regardless of what you may hear from those who oppose this bill, in no way does this proposal create more barriers to abortion laws. Again, all we are simply asking is to ensure that a baby born alive as a result of a failed abortion procedure is entitled to the same level of medical care and treatment as any other newborn child. That includes, if necessary, upon medical assessment, the possibility of life-sustaining treatment. If you guys are against discrimination in Australia, if you guys are against oppression in Australia, if you guys are for equality in Australia, this is the bill for you. And I urge you to get behind it. Thank you for your time.
Ms. Collier, did you have a further statement?
Yes.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you for inviting us to attend today. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge women who may have had abortions or who may be suffering today, and their partners as well. And there's an organisation called Abortion Grief Australia that operates a helpline that is there to help. So Right to Life Australia is here to advocate for the voiceless, for the unborn child who has an inalienable right to life, and that life cannot be given away to another person, to an abortionist or a person who deems their life valueless. And I was looking on ChatGPT this morning for inspiration, and I came up with Mother Teresa, of course, who said the right to life does not depend and must not be declared to be contingent on the pleasure of anyone else, not even a parent or a sovereign. So what is this bill about? It is about seeking a fair go, about seeking justice, and about righting wrong. So born alive babies after abortion, we recoil in disbelief, whether we're writing the submission, whether we are administering the offices in Parliament today, or whether we're here in person or on video. It is difficult to process the concept that any baby is just left to die. And is medical treatment of a born alive baby really determined by what is desirable and by whom? I've handed out a flow chart, and it's one page of just looking at Victoria under the microscope, Mothers, Babies and Children's Consultative Committee report, and this is produced every year. There's about 300 pages. So in Victoria, this report shows in 2020 that 43 babies were born alive and died postnatally for congenital problems. These disabilities are not labelled. They could be Down syndrome, cleft palate or a club hand. And this is the number for 2020. So does extremely rare mean 43 babies a year? If you look at the chart, I've just highlighted it in highlighter. So that shows the 43 babies who died perinatally in terminations of pregnancy, TOP, or abortions for suspected, or now it's suspected or confirmed congenital abnormality resulting in neonatal death. So in 2020 in Victoria there were 43, in 2019 34, in 2018 29, in 2017 28, in 2016 33, in 2015 31, in 2014 38, in 2013 43, in 2012 53 babies, and 2011 40 babies. So statements like late-term abortions are only for babies who are incompatible with life or that they are extremely rare are fake news as far as we're concerned. As I've said, babies are now being aborted late-term because of confirmed and now even suspected congenital problems. The disability, from what we can see, has not even been diagnosed in the wording. Babies are being aborted for having Down syndrome, a cleft palate, maybe a club hand. Babies who have a right to belong to society, as each one of us. And what is unknown is that late abortions are being performed for a whole range of psychosocial reasons, and this is 40% of late-term abortions in Victoria. But this is not just about statistics. I worked in Melbourne hospitals in the late 80s, and babies' lives were being saved every day, including those born to mothers who were drug addicted from disadvantaged backgrounds and whose babies were suffering at birth from these effects. These babies were not discriminated against. Money is being allocated and raised for treatment and research into every type of neonatal illness, from congenital heart problems to the best way to bond mum and dad, mum and baby in the NICU. This is about destruction of human life and life that is not wanted. These babies are alive. We have had calls to our office. One in particular, I took from very distressed midwife who knows the babies are alive and have told the stories. This midwife was shell-shocked when a baby was born and alive and left to die in a Melbourne hospital in 2013. And lastly, these babies are super babies. We should be celebrating their lives. To survive the intended destruction of their tiny bodies is a miracle. There must be legislation to right this injustice. They are entitled to care, no more but no less than any other baby born alive at that gestation. There must be legislation to protect them, as the Northern Territory coroner stated, from a death, in inverted commas, contrary to nature and caused by artificial means. And will all Australians commit to seeking justice for these babies today?
Thank you, Ms Collier. I know there are a number of senators seeking the call. I'm happy to pass back to you for a few minutes, but then I'd like to share it around. Thank you, Senator Canavan.
And thank you, Chair. I might just start with the document that's been tabled. Thanks, Ms Collier. I see here, and in my document, I presume in others, it's highlighted the number of, I think, 43. That's the babies born alive, is it, following a termination procedure? Is that what I thought I heard you say?
Yes, that's
just
a perinatal death. So there's either a stillborn, which is SB, or a neonatal death. So that is a baby whose life exists up to 28 days.
Right.
So it's not in terms of, so it could be a baby who survives 1 minute or a baby who survives up to 28 days. We don't know.
Yeah. This is a Victorian government or Victorian Health? Or
this is the Consultative Council on Obstetric and Paediatric Mortality and Morbidity Reports, their annual reports.
Okay, right. And I just asked earlier about the data. So this is for 2020. Are we waiting on data from 2021? Is it annual report? So it's just the latest that's come out, but we will get that data from the same source eventually. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So in 2020, I'm just trying to find, and I don't know if it's on this chart, so how many late-term abortions occurred in Victoria?
There's about 400 a year, and about 47%, I'm just trying to think, 47% are for what is called maternal psychosocial indications.
Okay, so that's not on this one. That's a
yes,
separate.
it is.
Is that there's a 474 down the bottom of the middle? Andrew, just for all top.
So if you go into the pale purple, as opposed to the dark purple, and you start with number O, this is the number of babies for psychosocial reasons resulting in neonatal death. So that's 0. And then go down lower to the 43.
Yeah.
So these are the babies resulting in neonatal death.
Yeah, I've got that one.
Yep.
I was just after how many late-term abortions. Is that on this? That might not be on this chart, is it?
Sorry.
The total number of late-term abortions.
152, just to add it up, sorry. 43, 129.
That's okay. And I think you're right. It was about 400 in other submissions because I've got, on the rough statistics I've been compiling here as a result of the Evidences Committee, it would seem that about 10% of late-term abortions in Victoria end in a live baby being born. I mean, that seems like a very high proportion. Yeah, obviously, there's a medical procedure here. The intention of the medical procedure is to end the baby's life. For them to, in 10% of cases, effectively fail seems like a particularly inefficient, or I don't like using that word, but a ineffective medical procedure. Why is it that late-term abortions fail at such high rates? Do you understand the medical reasons for that at all?
I think it's probably better to ask Dr. Saman on that comment. Yeah.
Right.
Medical side of it. Yeah.
Okay. You mean the doctor?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. If he's on the line, are you there, Dr. Saman? Is it? Is that how you pronounce it? Dr. Saman? Are you there?
Yes. Yeah. Hi.
Did you hear that question?
Yes. So, look, the chance of survival under optimal circumstances where mother and baby is separated with the intention of producing a live baby, you've got what's regarded as borderline survival potential between 22 and 24 weeks. In some institutions, they'll say that, the prognosis.
I might just stop you there. I think, given we've got a limited time, I might just stop you. I think you might be. I'm not asking about the chance of survival long term. I'm asking why is it that 10% of late-term abortion procedures seem to fail and fail from the perspective of a termination procedure and end up in a life being born. I realise most of those 10% then will eventually die, given the process the fetus, the baby's been through. But why is that? Why are they not producing the intended outcome before birth?
Because you are dealing, well, firstly, if they've not had feticide, an injection of potassium chloride in the heart at the start of the procedure to kill them, then you're dealing with babies whose ability to survive the procedure gets better and better with increasing gestation, okay? Right. So, once you're into 26 weeks and above, you've got a better rate of survival, even from an abortion procedure which intends to produce a dead baby. And I think that this is a very important point, because when you talk about used terms medically like common, for instance, there's a Council for International Organisation of Medical Sciences which says that anything from 1 to 10% in its incidence is a common incidence, right? If it's more than 10%, it's very common. If it's less than 1%, it's uncommon. And I did quote a paper earlier, and we're talking about this now. I mean, if it's in a range of 1 to 10%, it's common, okay? That's how you would describe that. It's not uncommon or very rare or rare. It's common. And it's related to how mature the baby is.
Senator Canavan, I do need to pass the call. If there's time at the end, I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Urquhart.
Thanks very much. I might start, Mr. Shaman, with you. You talked about palliative care and other instances of where babies could be made comfortable. Isn't it standard clinical practice, and this has come up in a lot of the submissions that this inquiry has actually received, that it is standard clinical practice that palliative care is currently provided in these circumstances?
Yes, it is supposed to be provided, but we hear so many accounts of babies just being left to die that it's not uniform, okay?
Right.
Now, you have to remember this is a situation where the healthcare professionals and the parent are a bit conflicted. You know, this is a termination of pregnancy. The intention is to deliver a dead baby, not a live one. And so there's always an element of shock and surprise when a live baby arrives, and people aren't always prepared to deal with that. You know, to switch from one mindset to another mindset. And I think that it's very important that women undergoing these procedures are aware that it is a real risk, okay? It is more common than what people realise, and the care providers need to be prepared to administer the same health care that you would give to any other child. Okay.
Can I just go on from that then? So can you tell me what your understanding is of the duties that health practitioners are currently subject to in carrying out termination of pregnancy?
Well, firstly, if you look at the Queensland guidelines, they explicitly state do not administer life-sustaining care, okay? If you've got Professor Howe's presentation, you'll see some detail in there. It talks about the baby being kept warm. But I think babies need more than that. You know, they need human contact. Now, when a baby is born alive after an abortion, neither the providers nor the parent may be in a frame of mind to necessarily provide that care. Okay, but that's irrelevant. You know, we have to realise that, you know, this baby is alive. Yes, it's not going to survive in most cases. We must administer appropriate palliative care. So the wrapping to keep it warm. Okay, you can't wrap it and just put it in a side wrap. It needs human contact, right? It's a human being. Again, depending on the gestation, if the baby is distressed through injuries it may have received, through the abortion, it may be appropriate to give pain relief, okay? I've been reading some of these guidelines and they are referenced in my opening statement. Yes, some babies may even be fitting because they've suffered a lack of oxygen, and palliative care means giving them an anticonvulsant. Others may be distressed because they're hungry and they may need a feed. So there's a whole range of these things that may be appropriate depending on the clinical circumstances of the child and its gestation.
So you talked about Queensland there specifically, but can you tell me what your understanding is of health practitioners generally are subject to in carrying out termination of pregnancy? Do you have any other understanding, or are you more familiar with Queensland, I guess?
Well, you know, my experience is anecdotal. I think that it would be best to ask people who are directly involved in termination of pregnancy. And, you know, there's a paucity of information. I guess I have to make the point, you know, that there isn't much information out there on what constitutes care for this particular group of babies.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just wondering about what your understanding of that was.
Look, my understanding is that it's not the same as other babies, and there are many examples of it being substandard.
Okay, I might throw to our witnesses at the table if they would like to add anything.
Yeah, I think, Senator, I think the problem we're having is, again, as already been pointed out, the only guidelines we have at Queensland in terms of, the clinical guidelines here. So all we can go off is what they've provided. And to go back to your earlier question about the level of palliative care, again, number one in the guidelines says, handle the baby gently and carefully and wrap to provide warmth. That's it. You know, and
Sorry, Mr. Cliff, that's the Queensland
That's the
guidelines
Queensland.
you're quoting there.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the Queensland, yeah.
Yeah.
But the big problem for, if you like, for us is number 3, where it says do not provide life-sustaining treatment, e.g. gastric tubes, IV lines and oxygen therapy. So that's what's being prevented from these children. So yeah, there's a measure, if you like, a small measure of palliative care, but they are being prevented from life-sustaining or even an assessment to see if they can have life-sustaining treatment. And that's the crux, really, to be honest.
Okay. I might leave it there at the moment.
Thank you,
Share it around.
Senator Antic.
Just thank you, and perhaps one for Matthew as well. Just on the issue of the Queensland healthcare guidelines, which I mean they do spell out, and it is, I mean from where I sit, quite extraordinary to read that. Number 1, handle the baby gently and carefully. Number 2, offer opportunities for support for the family's wishes. 3, do not provide life-sustaining treatment. Provide sensitive emotional support and reassurance to the parents, and then document the date and time or end of life occurs. So it's sit back and watch, basically, as a baby is struggling and potentially in a great deal of pain. Most Australians wouldn't understand that, would not know that that was the case. And I think, and I'm interested in your views on whether this is your belief as well, that is entirely inconsistent in my mind with other facets of our law. If you've made quite rightly the point in your submission there of, that the Queensland Criminal Code in that very state talks about when a child becomes a human being. I mean, even on that measure, and there'd be a divergence of views about that subject, I'm sure, but even under the Criminal Code in that very state, a child becomes a person capable of being killed when it has completely proceeded in a living state from the body of its mother, whether it has breathed or not, and whether it has independent circulation or not, and whether the navel string is severed or not. I've ever heard it called a navel string before. It's umbilical cord to me. But in any event, just tell us a little bit about what you think about the inconsistency of the two positions there. I mean, it would seem to me to be totally inconsistent with other human rights.
Yeah, Senator, I completely agree. I think you've just hit the nail on the head. The guidelines here that we're seeing in terms of the termination of pregnancy guidelines and the criminal code in Queensland are completely inconsistent. That's the reality.
Yeah.
You know, and that needs to be cleared up ultimately.
We heard from the Australian Christian Lobby earlier about the difficulty they've had in getting statistics about some of this, and I find that particularly telling about the manner in which there is motived for this story to be told to the Australian people. I think the Australian people would be very shocked if they learnt that this was a common practice. Your organisation, Cherish Life in Queensland, have you had similar difficulty locating statistics to find this?
Yeah, well, I think that's across the board. I think all organisations have struggled to get statistics. And again, just anecdotal experience. I obviously got a strange accent from the UK, and I've been involved in pro-life work in the UK. And every year, the NHS released the statistics. It's not even an issue. It's not even a problem. But I was shocked when I come here that you guys don't have any statistics. It's really bizarre to me, if I'm honest. I can't understand why. And as Wendy mentioned before, this is a benefit across the board. You know, I don't understand why you haven't got these statistics.
Right, but it's very confronting, perhaps. I think that's probably all from me. I'll pass back to Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Senator Antic. Just a reminder that I passed the call letter.
Can I say that I bequeath my...
I'll happily pass back to Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to Dr. Seaman, or I'm mangling your name.
That's okay. It's pronounced Sheman.
Sheman. Sorry, Dr. Sheman. Sheman. I wanted to go, I think it might have been your submission, or I might be looking at Cherish Life's. I want to go to this issue about potassium chloride because, and just given your medical experience, some submissions seem to indicate that is no longer provided, but others, as evidence, I think, to a Queensland parliamentary inquiry, saying that sort of is the method of choice for late-term abortions. What's your understanding of the status of the use of potassium chloride in late-term abortions, and is there any kind of guidelines or standards around its use in Australia?
Look, there was recently a paper published in the Medical Journal of Australia about this from Queensland Health, and my reading of it is that, yes, they still use potassium chloride. Now, potassium chloride injected into the baby's heart under ultrasound control causes a major imbalance of salts. It leads to a heart attack. It's a method which virtually guarantees that the baby will die. So I understand that it's still in use in various states. It's interesting though because it's no longer used for euthanasia in veterinary circles or for capital punishment because it's considered inhumane because of the pain that it causes. And considering that babies are pain capable from at least 15 weeks gestation onwards, I think that we have to bear that in mind. They're pain capable. It can cause severe pain through a heart attack.
Right. And there's no, when potassium chloride is used, there's no anaesthesia provided to the fetus or the baby beforehand?
Look, I'm not my knowledge is based on reading. I'm not directly involved in those. I look that there may be cases, but certainly there may not be cases. I can't answer that. You would have to actually ask a practitioner who is regularly doing those procedures and who can comment on that. Yeah.
So, by the sounds of it, though, there isn't any sort of set guidelines on this. Is it left up to the individual abortion clinic or hospital to decide how they conduct a late-term abortion?
I believe that it's offered because with feticide you avoid live birth, but some parents don't want it administered, and so there is an increased risk of live birth if the baby doesn't undergo feticide beforehand.
So if it's not administered, what's the other options? Is the baby just, I'm completely ignorant here, is the baby just induced and then what happens naturally? What's the other options?
Correct. So again, depending on gestation, there may be a surgical abortion called dilatation and evacuation, which is like a surgical procedure of dismembering the baby. If it's beyond the gestation where you do, well, firstly, the first trimester, they mostly do suction evacuation. That's the surgical method, or medical termination of pregnancy, also called two-step. In the early mid-trimester, surgical terminations are still done. They're called dilatation and evacuation. But then beyond that, you're mainly looking at inducing labour. And that would involve administering hormones which soften the cervix, and then other hormones which cause the uterus to contract. And because of the baby's prematurity, it can't withstand the stress of the labour and the delivery, and that's why most of them are born dead. Yeah,
right.
Stillborn.
That inducement process, is that the same as what would occur in a situation where the mother is intending to give birth to the baby, but for some reason there has to be an inducement? That it's exactly the same, is it, in a termination procedure as would happen normally?
There are similarities, but there are significant differences, because if you're planning to separate mother and baby with the intention of producing a live baby, you would only be inducing labour if the cervix was ripe, meaning that it was expected to dilate. Otherwise, if you try and induce labour where the cervix is unripe and it's not going to dilate easily, then that is going to be a much longer labour and have a higher risk of fetal distress and also effects on the mother. And so if you're aiming for a live baby, yes, you induce labour, but you also monitor looking for distress in the baby. And if that comes about, then you expedite or hurry up the delivery, and that may involve cesarean section.
Thanks very much. That's very useful. I've just got one final question back to Mr. Cliff or Ms. Collier. In the Cherish Life submission, You mentioned the coroner's report in the Northern Territory, which has come up a few times, and you say that as a result of this inquest, the coroner recommended that newborn babies were immediately assessed for gestational age and viability by a medical practitioner. Has that recommendation at all been acted on in the Northern Territory or anywhere else in the country?
As far as I'm aware, Senator, no.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair.
Canavan, Senator Urquhart.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, given Mr. Showman's testimony. Do you think, and I'll throw this open to all the witnesses, both at the table, but also Dr. Showman, how do you think practitioners apply their clinical expertise and judgment? And I think my understanding is that they can provide palliative care where relevant under existing guidelines and practices. So I'm just interested to hear your feed on that. Dr. Showman, would you like to start?
Look, I think if you've got the ideal circumstance where the staff are trained in appropriate palliative care and the patient is open to it, yes, I could see that happening. However, where you've got, so this relates to babies in particular that aren't going to survive, they're pre-viable. But once you've got a baby that has that potential to survive, really a paediatric assessment is the ideal, because paediatricians, and in particular neonatologists who specialise in the area, are able to assess the baby thoroughly and determine what palliative care steps are needed. Okay. So if terminations are being done in freestanding abortion clinics, they won't have the same facilities, right? They won't have a paediatrician available. As I mentioned earlier, mothers having terminations of pregnancy where there is the potential for a live birth, and in particular a viable baby that could survive, they should really be done in tertiary institutions, firstly because maternal mortality is higher in those terminations of pregnancy, but also tertiary institutions have got paediatricians. And so when those women are admitted, the paediatrician should be notified of the potential of a live birth and the need to assess the baby, and then direct what kind of palliative care or other measures may be needed.
So can I just follow on and ask, is it your understanding that those late-term terminations are in fact carried out in standalone abortion clinics?
Look, if you define late term as 20 weeks plus, my understanding is that some are still being done, yes, beyond 20 weeks, yes.
Right.
But again, you could check that with the relevant Maori Stokes International.
Yeah. No, that's okay. If you don't know the answer, that's fine. Mr. Cliff or Ms. Collier, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so I can comment in terms of obviously just anecdotal testimonies that I've heard from, again, healthcare practitioners. Again, this is, we've heard that there are some that are very traumatised, but I can actually quote from Caroline DeCosta, who's an obstetrician who's, I presume, opposing this bill. And she says here, termination of pregnancy during late gestation is distressing for parents and can also be challenging for medical and midwifery staff. So again, this is as distressing not only for ourselves who we're looking to put forward this bill, but for even people within the healthcare.
What about their? Sorry to sort of jump in, but what about what's your understanding in relation to them applying their clinical expertise and judgment? Is that, in your view, is that a good? Do they apply that professionally? And do you understand that they can provide palliative care where relevant existing guidelines and practices are?
Do I? Yeah, obviously I can't speak across the board. I don't know what goes on, but I can hope and imagine that they were doing their job to the best of their ability. I think the guidelines is hamstrings them a little bit to not being able to offer the full amount of care that they should be offering.
Yeah. And at the moment, as I understand, it appears that Queensland has the the best guidelines or
Well,
whatever.
it has the guidelines.
Yeah.
It has the guidelines that,
Yeah.
we don't have any other guidelines at all in any other states at the moment.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Collier, did you want to add anything, or you don't have to? I'm just giving you the option.
I'd
Because we
just
are
like to
coming
read,
up
there
to
was a
the vote.
submission in 2016 to the Parliament of Queensland Abortion Law Reform Amendment Bill, and this submission said, in some cases, termination of pregnancy may be indicated after 22 weeks in situations where the baby has severe and significant abnormalities which have not been diagnosed earlier. And this is the information. In these situations, the mother is usually offered medication to allow the baby to pass away peacefully before birth. In situations where this is not done and the baby is born alive, the baby is provided with whatever is needed to allow him or her to pass away without distress or pain. So really, I can only say that's the information we have, whatever is needed.